Hi guys, thanks for joining me in my studio today. Hope you're having a great day. My day's going pretty well. This is an oil painting of Stace Harbour. I painted it over a 2-day period. Had a lot of fun doing it. I want to show you how I went about getting all this texture in the rocks and the light catching the buildings and the sand being troweled through by this little boat that the fishermen are pushing into the sea. Really exciting painting to do. So let's just get right into it. Today I'm going to be working on an oil painting of Stace Harbour. I have a palette of, well, you can see it on the screen now. I'm not just going to read all of the colours out. They are all Winsor and Newton colours though, and I'm using things like the phthalo turquoise mixed with the magenta and a little bit of burnt umber to get a nice black, and maybe the phthalo turquoise and ultramarine blue to make nice purples, and some oranges with the burnt sienna and the raw sienna, burnt sienna and raw sienna to get a nice orange. So I'm actually sketching this in with the burnt sienna. I felt that just a quick sketch just to get me going would be in order of the day really. Although, to be honest with you, it must have been early in the morning, because as you look at the painting in the bottom left, now this is a digital painting that I painted a while back. You can see that on my digital painting channel, Steve Elliott Art. If you want, I'll put a link in the description. And I wanted to do it as a traditional painting in oil paints. You can see I'm already changing things there on my sketch, but the actual sketch that I do now is not very good. I couldn't have been concentrating very well. When I come to put the people in, you'll see exactly what I mean. So that's this is in real time. I'm going to speed it up in a second because I go fairly slow with the drawing process. But you can see how small I've made those people compared to the original painting, and I don't spot that for quite a while in, so that's a little bit of a shame really. But you know, that's the thing, isn't it? Everything can be changed. I can change everything up as I'm going. So I'm going in there with the sky now, and I'm using a combination of ultramarine blue and titanium white, and I'm using lots of liquid. I've coated this board. It was a pre-coated or pre-prime canvas, again Winsor & Newton, but I gave it 2 more coats of gesso, or gesso, depending on how you pronounce it, because the paint just goes on so much better if you do that. And this is ultramarine blue and titanium white, and I'm kind of trying to get that same kind of angle on the brush strokes that's in the painting, where they're all pointing to this rock face. The actual painting, you can see, is a bit burnt out, and the colours are a little bit deeper than what's on the video, to be honest. They're a little bit pale looking, but you can see I'm sort of doing all the brush strokes in the direction that the sky is in my digital version of the painting. And I'm mixing this up. I've actually got ultramarine blue and white, and I've also got some cobalt blue and white. And there you can see, I don't know if you could, I could just notice the difference in the colour then. You can see slightly that some areas have got ultramarine blue, and I mix up a slightly deep colour and go into it again. Not worried about hiding the brush strokes. I love the idea that you can always see brush strokes. Everything with me is all about, it's a painting, it's not about it being a photograph or looking like a photograph. I don't want it to look like a photograph. I want it to look painterly, and I'm trying to catch a mood of when I was there. So that is the sky pretty much finished at this stage. In day 2, I do go in there and strengthen it up quite a lot. And you can see probably there, as I'm now painting this rock face, I'm using a lot of liquid in with my colours, so the canvas shows through. So this is like the underpainting, and I want some of the areas to almost where you can see the canvas glowing through the paint. And then other areas, I want thick paint on the canvas. So although I'm going over the old thing with really thin paint to start with, and then build it up thicker, a lot of the areas are going to remain really thin paint. So I'm taking my time, being very careful with every brush stroke really. I do a lot of standing back. I love to, that's why I paint standing up. I want to be able to keep moving back all the time and look what I've done and check balances and things. Just mix the colour up a little bit more to add a little bit of the sap green in there. So we've got, I'm guessing, well, we've definitely got ultramarine blue and burnt umber on the right hand side of that rock face, and then I've added some sap green into the left side of it. At the minute, I'm really enjoying painting on white canvas and letting that canvas glow through in places. Speeded it up a little bit now. I'm not really suddenly had a sip of coffee and gone into overdrive. And I want it to be, like I say, very painterly. I want to see lots of brush strokes and sort of let you as the viewer make up your mind what everything is. I don't want to get in there and put in lots of detail. Now on that distant hill that's going in now, just lightening it up a little bit, I soften off the top edge just to throw it back into the distance a bit, putting some raw sienna into the rock face there. Bit of ultramarine blue. Bringing the water line across the sea, and you can see I've just started to put the indications of the reflections of that rock face in the water. So I'm still working with really thin washes at this point. Raw sienna's going on there. Mixed with the liquid. A little bit of magenta in the raw sienna. A little bit of burnt umber to get that nice red. Then adding a bit of ultramarine. So I'm sort of mixing as I'm going on the palette, mixing it in with the liquid so it's really thin. A bit of raw sienna with some titanium white to get a lighter sand in the foreground. So there we go. Now I'm going in with the buildings, and I don't want them to be too white or standing out too much, otherwise your eyes are just going to be drawn straight to them. And I really want the focal point to be the fisherman pushing the boat out into the sea. So I'm sort of making sure I'm getting mid-tones into those walls. But I do want to capture the red of the roofs, but I've got to be careful that I don't make it a bright red, and then you're just going to be drawn straight to that. So although I'm going in with some red there, I'm going to need to well, when I say red, it's the burnt sienna mixed with raw sienna. And I will need to knock them back a bit. And again, I don't want to paint every building. As you can see in the painting in the corner, there's just a little indication of the buildings really there. There's nothing of any real detail. In fact, the buildings that I've painted in the oil version don't bear that much resemblance to the ones in the original painting, if that makes sense. So at this point, I'm using, I've got this picture on my iPad, you just saw me there. I've got the photo on the screen as well. And every now and again, I just flick back to the photo just to remind me what the buildings look like. And then I go back to the oil painting. But most of this was done looking at the oil painting. I didn't use the photograph much at all, to be honest. I find if I've done these paintings, I much prefer looking at those than the photographs, because I've made decisions about composition, I moved things around, I've chosen colours, and I want to try and emulate those and reproduce them as best as I can in my oil painting. Whereas if I look at the photograph, I might be tempted to use the colour that's in the photo, for example, for the colour of a building or something. I change them up quite often. So I might be tempted to do that, and I don't want to. Very delicate strokes going in there. See, I'm taking my time. I have thickened up the paint a little bit now, actually. So not using quite so much liquid. Just sculpting the gable ends of the buildings. Trying to make sense of... So just putting in a rectangular block and making sense of it, giving you the impression that it is a building without paying too much attention to actual real structure. So at this point, they are quite light, and I'm going to need to get some darks in there and knock them back a little bit because they are quite dominant at this point. Just going to speed it up again. So I'll put the boat in, still not realising that I've got these people way too small. Get a little bit of highlight in there where the wind is blowing across the sea. And then I decide that the highlight isn't bright enough, but it is. It's the sea that isn't dark enough. I needed to tone that down a bit, make it a bit darker. And after day one, I've sort of looked at it and I'm thinking I'm going to make it even darker still. But what you're looking at now is the colour that I settled for at the end of day one. At this point, while I'm doing this audio, I've only just done the painting for day one, so I thought I'd do the audio straight away while everything's still fresh in my mind of the painting process. So I've got no idea yet what I'm going to do with it on day two. Well, I've got an idea. here we go. Look, now I've sort of thought, oh man, these people, they're not big enough. I want to move them across a little bit as well. They're not quite in the right place. So I decided to just bite the bullet, paint them out, take them out completely, finish the sea off, and then put them back in again. But I don't put them in straight away. I leave it quite a while, actually. Guess I'm mixing up some colour there. Yeah. Just to block out the boat. Of course, it would be turquoise, which, you know, is quite a strong colour. There we go. I have to say, the contrast on the video doesn't really do justice to the painting. The darks are a lot darker. I think it's the light. I have a problem with the light coming through the. So I've got 3 big windows in my studio, and one's on the side. And I think the light, it's the canvas and just refracts the light, because looking at the light on me and the walls, it's about right, but on the painting, it's too light. And I think it's because it's wet and the lights from the windows just bouncing off. So then I thought, okay, let's contrast all of this very thin paint with some palette knife work in the foreground. So I know I want some purples in there and some sort of sandy colours and darker purples and greens and things. So I mix up some colours for the palette knife and start putting them on and get this real thick texture, which does work quite well. I have to say, it was working well, except for one problem. And I'll tell you what that is in a second or two. So I'm now going into the second stage of the painting, where I've sort of blocked it all in, and I'm adding abstract detail really with the palette knife, just scumbling on paint, thick paint. And I'm conscious of how the light's catching the sand where the boat sort of drag through the sand. And you can see I put quite a lot of texture on there, which looks great. But the problem is, once I've done it, I think the issue is that it's so strong and so eye-catching, it totally dominates. And when I put the people in, when I repaint them back in, which I'm going to do now, I'm just drawn to all of this scumbled, thick oil paint in the foreground. It's just totally picked up the mole stick there, just because I've got a real shaky hand. I can't carry a cup of tea, it would just be all over the floor. So I'm just freehanding these characters in now, really. And all of this, you can probably see it actually. All of the thick oil paint in the foreground, although it's great because I've got this sort of texture going off in the foreground, and then it's sort of in the background, it's much more thinner coats of paint. It just dominates and totally detracts from the main focal point. So I have to resolve that at some point. And now, of course, because I'm sort of painting on this light ground, I'm not getting the real darks that I want, because it's lifting the colour underneath. So I'm just conscious. I just want to get the characters in, and then I'm thinking I can beef them up a bit again on the second day. They're still smaller than the actual original painting, but much better than they were. I'm using quite a small brush with this. I think it's a number 2 or something like that. Just a sable. Because I wanted them to be, I had to take my time, because although they are, just an indication of characters, they've got to be kind of proportionally correct and look like people, even though it's just sort of a simple stroke like that to indicate them. So I'm continually looking at the reference for that. And it's amazing, actually, how looking at the reference, I can still see the people and the forms of the bodies to get them in. You see my mole sticks just catching the top of the sky, which was annoying. I noticed it a little bit later on, so I have to do a little bit of touch-up work on the sky as well, which was a little bit annoying. So here we go, we're speeding it up again. I found that I went back over it. If I mix some ultramarine blue with a magenta, quinacridone magenta, and a bit of burnt umber, I got a nice, really dark, almost black colour. So here I'm starting to think, okay, I've got to do something with all of this thick paint that we've got on there. And what I decide to do, in actual fact, is I don't scrape it off or anything. I just sort of brush into it and sort of push the paint around a little bit. There's one bit I do wash off, actually. I get a little bit of white spirits, and you'll see in a minute or two, but I do sort of wash a little bit of the paint off to try and get back to the canvas so I can get a nice vibrant wash on again. But the best part, I just sort of push the paint around, and it's still I don't know what I did. And the second I put that on, I realised I'd made a mistake, and it's here that I'm thinking, yeah, you've got to get rid of all of this knife work, and let's just smooth it out with a brush. I didn't sort of get my brush and spread it over it. I just sort of teased it around gently so the colours stayed vibrant, although they're not quite so vibrant in that. You can see they're a little bit muddy in that lower right area where I'm painting now. So what I'm doing, look, I'm scrubbing on white spirits, and then I just put a wash of raw sienna back over it again to lift it out, and that did the trick. So that's sort of back to just a very thin wash on that area now, and I can start working into it again. I'm just introducing colours back into the rock face that I put on the sand, trying to darken up those characters. I'm still going to have another go at them because I still don't think that they're quite right. The colours need to be more vibrant in places and darker in others, and I definitely need to work on the sea. But it was interesting that it sort of evolved and morphed in several ways, from having like a palette knife painting back to a brush painting. Getting a few waves in there now. I wanted to get the water sort of lapping round the boat. I don't know if you can see that too well. So I'm pretty much, every sort of time I do a brush stroke, I wipe my brush with a towel. I think I'm doing it off the screen, just to sort of blend those colours in together. And that sort of means that I'm not leaving too much paint on the canvas, and then I can start adding fresh colour again. So the palette knife works pretty much gone now, and I'm starting to use the brush again. Looking at I spent a lot of time looking at the tonal contrast, looking at where the darks should be in the mid-tones, and trying to build them up. I noticed there was areas of light in the middle of the mid-tones that shouldn't be there, that needed sort of knocking back a little bit. You can see that's what I'm working on now. I'm just sort of taking a step back and looking at tone rather than detail. And again, this is something I need to work on the second day a bit more, I think. Trying to bring a little bit more colour back into it as well. So I was really pleased that I managed to rescue the palette knife while it was still all wet. I still managed to keep the colours quite vibrant and light and not sort of sludgy and sort of all greys mixed together. Just breaking up the edge of that sand there, so it's not like just a line, solid line going all the way down to the boat. Touching up the sky where I'd missed a little bit of the sky. Just fix that area where I touched it with a mole stick. A few more highlights around the boat. But at this point, it's getting so that I can't get the highlights in I want. I'm going to go back into the buildings though, because I know that they're just sort of knock back the bright orange on the roofs a little bit. Tidy up the gable ends. Just the indication of a few details in there. And I'm going to, where we've got all those white walls and stuff, just add a little bit of grey onto those walls, just to knock the buildings all back, just to throw them into the distance just a little bit. I just felt they were all a little bit in the foreground. There we go. So we're coming really close to the end of day one now, and I'm really happy with where we're at, and I cannot wait to get back into it. But it's Friday, so I shan't be touching this again now till Monday. I've got 2 days to wait before I can start painting again. So I'll see you in a couple of days. Hello again. Here we are back in day 2. So my goals today are to deepen up the sky, and you can see there I'm putting on a glaze of a sort of a soft purple colour mixed up with ultramarine blue, quinacridone magenta and a little bit of white, and lots of liquid to make it very transparent. I'm just adding that over that. I want to deepen the sea as well, and make the track in the sand a bit more defined where the fishermen are dragging the boat into the water. So I've got the sky in. I'm now just putting a few highlights on the water, and then I'm going to go in. There you can see I'm brushing in some dark tones into the sea there. It's making the water pop a bit more, although I do think that that's too much, and I knocked that back pretty much straight away, really. You can see I'm sort of painting into that, knocking it back. Deepening up the shadows of the rock face in the sea there. Taking that right the way along. Just softening them off a little bit at the edge. I felt it was a little bit too solid and I wanted to break it up a little bit. And also a bit fiddly, so I went in with a bigger brush there, as you can see. Using really raw sienna there, mixed with a little bit of white. And now I'm working in to this path that I want to sort of get the impression that the sand has been ploughed over. So I'm sort of hopping all over the painting, really. Wherever I see something that I'm not happy with, I'm just sort of going in there and working on it. So I've put a little bit of foam on the sea just as it crashes on the sand, and then you'll see in a little while I'll sort of paint that off a little bit or blend it away so it's not quite so sharp. Just darken up the figures a little bit, and I just wanted to tweak that one character. Adding a much brighter colour, pure colour really, out of the tube, of the turquoise, well, a little bit of white in it actually, of the turquoise onto the boat, softening up those whiter tones on the sea. Then I decide that I want to put a little bit of detail into the rock face and these sort of horizontal lines of rocks where they've sort of fractured over the centuries. I'm sort of putting them in first of all with lights, then I go in with some darker colours and put the sort of shadows underneath the boulders that make up this rock face, I guess. You see the dark tones going in now. So just sort of tightening it up a little bit and putting a bit more detail on it. You can see there, I just missed a little bit of the sky that I wanted to blend in. Put in a little bit of the purple that I've got into the sand, into that rock face. I just felt it was looking a bit fiddly, so I got some bigger brush strokes in there and painted them in to give it that more painterly feel again, instead of the really defined rocks that I'd started to paint in, I guess. And put a little bit of dark shadow under the houses, around the tops of them. And I also start to look at the sand again, and I'm thinking I need to just sort of make that track look a little bit more, it's just sort of sitting on top of the paint, and I wanted it to blend in more with the painting from the first day. So I mix up this purple colour and start putting highlights on the sand really, but in purple, not in the sandy colour. And I think that adds a lot to it. I really like that effect, although I do sort of just soften it off a little bit. Unfortunately, I didn't record it, but you'll see in the finished painting, I'll soften that off. And now I'm putting in some darker marks where the shadows are being cast, where there's a groove in the sand. So again, just put in a little bit of detail, just a suggestion. There we are, the shadows in that sand. And looking at it, I felt that purple just wasn't quite right. So this is the finished painting, done in 2 sittings. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, big thumbs up, as always, is much appreciated. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, because I have lots of videos like this and I would love to be sharing them with you. So hopefully I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.